Hello, everybody, and welcome into Commodity Culture, where we break down commodities markets, sound money principles, and geopolitics, all with the goal of making you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day. Today is January 6th, 2026, and I'm thrilled to welcome David Wu to the program, a hedge fund manager, former top Wall Street global macro strategist, and host of the David Wu Unbound show. David's investment theme for 2026 is Don't Fight Trump. He dives into the implications of the recent arrest of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and what it means for the global economy and financial markets, what Trump's next moves are, and why investors should be paying attention, along with breaking down the Russia-Ukraine conflict and how he sees it coming to a close sooner rather than later, and the myth of China invading Taiwan, why it's not happening anytime soon, and of course, gold's role in all of this and where he sees the metal headed in 2026. If you love silver, pick up your Stack Silver Not Fiat t-shirt. 100% quality guarantee. Use the link below. And now, my friends, strap yourselves in for my conversation with David Wu. David Wu, it is great to have you on Commodity Culture. I want to kick things off with a discussion on the gold market because you recently released a video on your YouTube channel titled, "Can the Four Forces Driving Gold Rally Do It Again in 2026?" Break that down for us. What are the four forces you see driving gold right now, and how do you expect the metal to perform this year?
Great. Thanks for having me on. I think, I'm a macro guy, so macro guys live and die on correlations, right? Because correlation gives us some sense about like who's buying, who's selling, that sort of thing, because, there are things that are closer to the sort of the fundamental drivers. I think when it comes to gold, this is especially the case. Right? Now, to me, what the most interesting thing, of course, about 2026, and I'll be the first one to admit, I did not foresee the 60% rally in gold, which caught me by surprise. So maybe, it was a humbling thing, to see that happen. But nevertheless, what is interesting, and then to make a prediction, you kind of have to know what happened. Like, if you don't understand what happened, like, you have no business making predictions. Now, I think what was interesting, of course, is that, gold has sported a lot of very reliable correlations over the years. And they've all pretty much broken down last year, right? If you think about this, the gold dollar correlation broke down because the dollar went down a bit in the first quarter and then went flat. Gold basically kept going up and up and up. Clearly, it was not a dollar story. Clearly, it was not also a real yield story. In the past, like real yields go down, gold goes up, right? Because real yields is sort of the proxy of the opportunity cost of gold and gold. Last year, real yields went down a bit, in the first quarter again, and then the flat line, but gold just kept going up. So it was not a real yield story either. Now, is it an inflation story? Over the years, gold and oil had traded with a pretty reliable positive correlation. But last year, oil price collapsed, but gold kept going higher. Is it a safe haven story? You just think about this. Bitcoin collapsed and gold kept going higher. The Swiss franc, the Japanese yen did poorly. So there clearly is not it's not a simple, basically safe haven story either. Is it a global, basically is it a geopolitical risk premium story? I would argue that, we're actually closer to the end of the Russia-Ukraine war than any time in the last 4 years. I don't think, in fact, you could argue, we can talk about this a little bit later. And then so the US and Israel hit Iran, right? I live in Israel. And, in the end, that whole thing blew over, oil prices lower. So if oil is supposed to be basically a proxy of geopolitical risk premium, it's difficult to make the case that gold is higher because of higher geopolitical risk premium when oil has been a big loser of 2025. So therefore, the question really is, what's going on here? The first thing is, the first correlation, I would just simply say that of all the correlations in the world that gold is known for, the one correlation that did not break down was, of course, the gold equity correlation. Now, it's interesting because before COVID, gold and equity had a negative correlation, understandably, right? Higher, basically, equities, lower gold, but lower equity, higher gold. That's obvious. That's the gold's risk aversion, safe haven, basically, channel comes in. Since COVID, of course, gold and equity have sported a positive correlation. And this correlation continued last year. Higher stocks, higher gold. Lower stocks, lower gold. How do you explain that? I think, one way, there are two ways to explain this. One is the fact that it's what we call in finance is sort of the portfolio channel, which is to say, let's just say you want to have 5% of your portfolio in gold, right? Which means that if the rest of your portfolio goes up a lot in value, let's just say stocks go up a lot, and all of a sudden you have a much bigger portfolio. Obviously, you have to buy some gold. You have to add to your gold position in order to maintain its 5%, 10%, whatever the proportion is. And this is one reason why. So in a way, the fact that gold and stocks have been moving the same direction up is probably that effect that, as stock market goes up, people have to buy more gold in order to maintain the weight of gold in their portfolio. That's one channel. I think another channel is that retail investors, I don't tell you. I mean, retail investors, they buy stocks, they buy gold. That's it. So the fact that both gold and stocks have been going up, I think in the post-COVID environment, just tells you the increasing role that retail investors are playing in the financial market. I think that is very, very, very clear to me. So I think so. Therefore, so if we want to make a prediction about 2020, basically, six, the first thing you have to say, well, what's the upside for the stock market, right? I mean, in a way, I think gold's outlook is going to be to a great extent dictated by what happens in the stock market. Let's put it this way, I'm definitely not that constructive about the stock market. So, I mean, it's difficult to say this right here today or whatever when the market's rallying, but we can talk about that a little bit later. I'm less constructive about the stock market. For one thing, I think, I think rates could be actually heading higher rather than lower from here. But that's a sort of a separate thing. If you're just talking about the driver, this is one major driver. The other driver, of course, is the geopolitical driver. Now, my view is very simple. I think, we can sit here and, and discuss what Trump just did in Venezuela. Is it legal? Is it moral? Is it whatever it is? But let's not beat around the bush. I mean, I think that's not that important because that's for another YouTube channel. Here, we're talking about to make money, okay? What matters here, in my humble opinion, is the fact that Trump pulled it off. That's it. He might not have put it off because you know what? The honest truth is, had basically, the U.S. gone into Venezuela, they didn't come home with Maduro. Instead, let's just say they lost a couple of Marines and one plane got taken down. That would have been the end of the Trump presidency. That's it. Okay. So from that point of view, the fact he managed to pull it off, that is the most important thing here because, power dictates, might dictates whatever, whatever policy and so on and so forth. And by the way, I think there's a reason most likely. I cannot imagine it's a coincidence that Bibi Netanyahu was in Mar-a-Lago the day before Trump gave the go-ahead, okay, on Venezuela. Because to be honest with you, I think this whole thing smells like a Mossad mission. Right? Because if you look at U.S. special military operations of this kind, has been one ending sequence of failures, starting with Bay of Pigs and then the 78 hostage crisis in Iran and then Black Hawk Down, that kind of thing. I mean, to me, this, I would be very surprised if Mossad did not at least play an advisory role. Let's put it this way. This is the kind of thing that, and I think, from that point of view, if the Mossad was involved, if Israel was at all involved in this, it tells me this has also a lot to do with Israel's ongoing war against Iran. Okay. To me, the most important, basically, I think Venice was important, but not that important because I think the fact that Trump pulled it off just means that they probably had inside help. I cannot believe that they knew it. Listen, Maduro was basically not captured like walking the park with his dog. He was captured inside a military base. You think that basically there was plenty of warning beforehand. Like, there is no way that the Americans could have done what they did without having, inside help from probably people who are very close to him. If not the entire regime, just decided to basically cough him up and throw him up, whatever it is. So my view is that the transition, I'm not worried about. I think we've seen the maximum geopolitical risk as far as Venezuela is concerned. At least that's my gut says. And this is why I'm actually short oil. I've been short oil for a while. We'll talk about that for a second. But the point here is that I think the transition, okay, post Maduro is going to be smoother than people think. I think Trump has no interest in promoting democracy because was not about promoting democracy. This is about naked, basically oil grab by the United States. That's it. Okay. So from that point of view, all Trump wants to do is basically get as much oil out of Venezuela to enrich the Americans. So that's lower oil price. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Now, on the flip side, to me, the domino effect on Iran is the most interesting thing. Because in a way, I can tell you, like what a lot of your viewers may not know is the fact that Iran, okay, in addition to its many economic difficulties, they've been going through probably the worst water crisis that any country has ever gone through the last 100 years. Okay, and we can discuss why this is the case, that kind of thing, but it doesn't really matter. What I can tell you is that the water reservoir supporting Tehran is now literally at 5% capacity. Okay. I'm telling you that there's water rationing. And not only that, the farming community in Iran, which is the political backbone of the Khamenei regime, obviously is up in arms, right? Because, crops are dying, so on and so forth. So even before Trump gave the go-ahead to take out, Maduro, social unrest and riots had been spreading like wildfire in Iran. Okay. And to me, there's no doubt, certainly from the Israeli side, and I'm sure from Trump's side as well, that that the timing of Maduro's capture is meant to embolden the protesters in Iran. Okay. Because the last time something like this happened in Iran, Obama was still the president. And of course, Obama, the students were getting shot across Iran. Obama did nothing, even though they were pleading for help from the US. Okay. Trump this time has already openly said that if basically if the regime kills the protesters, what with the U.S. is not going to stand aside. So I have no doubt. Even like the news earlier this week, there was basically a piece of news came out of the Times of London that that Khamenei is about to get on the plane with his 20 advisors to flee Iran. I guarantee you, it was probably, if it's not a Mossad, it was certainly a CIA propaganda. Because what they want basically the Iranians people to believe is that the regime is about to collapse. You should all come in the streets now and overthrow them. So my general view is that actually, ironically, I mean, if you believe this, and I'm certainly of the view that the the Ukraine war is winding down. We're really literally in the last 5% left of this thing. So I think geopolitical risk is going to be going down, believe it or not. And everybody who's buying gold yesterday saying, oh, well, this means that China is not going to invade Taiwan. They clearly have no idea what they're talking about. Okay. I'm from Taiwan. I grew up in Taiwan. My parents still live in Taiwan. I can tell you, like, for China to invade Taiwan because of what Trump did to Venezuela, it will be an overreaction to the 1 billion degrees. Right? Because you think that if Trump took out Maduro, it's not going to trigger World War III. I don't think anybody thinks that. China invading Taiwan will trigger World War III. Okay? So from that point of view, like, it's not possible. More likely, there's no question, this means that it's going to accelerate China's encroachment on the oil reserves underneath, the South China Sea. It's a different story. That would be much more of a proportional response to this. And therefore, honestly, I think geopolitical risk as a driver of gold in 2025, 2026 is overstated. I think, in fact, geopolitical risk premium will be going down. Now, so I think that's a second factor here, okay, that I think is not that bullish for gold. Okay, so the first factor, as I said before, the stock market, I don't think it's that. I'm not that bullish. Doesn't mean that gold would necessarily go down, by the way. I'm just saying that I think you're not going to see anything close to the 60% return last year, and there will be more volatility. So my view is probably, I think the stock market doesn't have that much upside from here. I think geopolitical risk premium will be going down. And then the third thing is that I think, Tether last year bought a lot of gold, and there's no doubt that, that was a big part of it. But I think the Tether story, we have to basically bear this in mind. If you recall, we had the Genius Act was passed last year. The Genius Act says that all stable coins that are pegged to the US dollar have to be backed by treasuries. Okay. So it's not like, stable coins can all of a sudden start buying gold, to essentially as reserves for the dollar linked dollar peg, basically stable coins. So I think what Tether bought most likely last year was probably for their corporate balance sheet. I mean, they were making a lot of money, so they probably made a one-off conversion into gold, for whatever reason. I mean, I think the guy obviously likes gold, whatever it is. But that's not sustainable. That's not to say that year in, year out they're going to buy $10 billion of gold. I doubt it. Okay. So I mean, especially now the interest rate's gone down, they're not going to make as much money as they did last year. So I think all in all, this is not it's not an amazing factor here. The fourth factor here, okay, I think is obviously the whole China thing, right? I mean, there is a lot of everybody's talking to gold. The World Gold Council talks about it. Everybody's talking about, well, China's buying a lot more gold than they have officially declared. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Okay, so is that true? Is it not true? Because if you look at the official number, China bought much less gold last year than they did the year before and the year before that. So it's not in the data. Okay. Now you might say, okay, fine. So like China is buying a lot of gold that hasn't been reported, but we all know, like if they were buying large quantity of gold, it's going to show up in the import numbers. Okay. We know from Chinese gold import numbers, the basically monetary gold import numbers, it was down last year versus the year before. Now, how could that be? My view is that it's very simple because China is also the largest gold producer in the world. They account for 10% of gold production. I think what happened was that China was simply, the Chinese central bank was probably buying more gold by sourcing it locally. So China net, there's no evidence that China net has become a massive net buyer of gold or that they somehow imported a lot of gold last year. It's just not in the numbers. Okay, so I think all in all, yeah, I do believe that central banks, I think we're now living in a time that reserve managers have to buy gold. There's no doubt about that. I'm sure like everybody is wary of debasement of the dollar and so on and so forth, but for long-term reason. But I think that that's why I'm thinking that we might see an okay year for gold for no other reason than that. I understand. I mean, people feel like there's no safe haven anymore. In fact, even the fact that Bitcoin is done poorly probably is another bullish gold factor because people feel like they have to buy something. And that's what it is. So I'm not forecasting a negative return year for gold, but my suspicion is that it's not going to do nearly as well. But that's a bit of a cop-out answer, I realize, but that's what it is.
The sponsor of today's episode is ARK Silver Gold Osmium. Owner Ian Everard is praised even by his competitors as one of the most honest and level-headed bullion dealers in the United States. They have some great prices. You can see some of them displayed right now on screen. Take advantage of these specials today by reaching out to Ian at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arksgo.com. Make sure to tell him, of course, that Commodity Culture sent you. And now, back to the interview. I would love to also follow up on your comments regarding the Russia-Ukraine conflict potentially coming to an end. You mentioned you think we could be in the last 5% of that conflict. How do you see that playing out? Because we've seen so much, of these back and forth peace talks where representatives of the U.S. administration speak to Russian representatives. They seem to not be able to come to an agreement. The EU gets involved. They start making demands on Russia that they would never realistically accept. It just seems like a whole dog and pony show without any real resolution in sight. And a lot of analysts believe that this conflict will in fact be ended on the battlefield with a military victory by Russia. How do you see it all playing out, and why do you think we're so close to the end of it?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think I have not always been of this view that this war is winding down so soon. But something happened, 6 weeks ago when I saw the 28-point plan, okay, that, was dictated by Putin to Trump when they met in Alaska. I mean, that it's very clear that the Trump's 28-point plan was what the Russians said that they needed to basically, to essentially to stop. When I saw that plan, I almost fell off my chair because my first reaction was like, what? Like Putin is willing to give up that much? Now, what do I mean by that? Okay. I think it's an incredibly reasonable plan. I have to believe that Zelensky probably felt the same when he saw it at the first good, and that's what I explain to what I mean by that. Think about this. Right now, they're saying, "Oh, well, they're still basically like stuck over the whole territorial question." But think about this. I mean, this is not rocket science. I mean, I know a lot about this war. I'll just say this. I've been following it very closely for the last 4 years. And let me tell you this. It's very simple. It boils down to this. Russia has annexed 5 of, Ukraine's basically regions. That is Kherson, that is Zaporozhye, that's Crimea, that's Donetsk and Luhansk. What Putin basically agrees to in this 28-point plan is that they're going to stop at the current contact line in Zaporozhye and Kherson, which means that they're going to forfeit a third of these two, basically, oblast. In exchange, Putin wants the 10% of Donetsk that's still yet under Ukrainian control. And then Putin is even willing to throw in some more. He's willing to get out of, the Russian-controlled territories in Kharkiv and Sumy. Okay. So in other words, Putin, who has been insisting that Russia needed a buffer zone on top of everything else, okay, is willing to even get that up. I mean, when I saw this, I was, well, what happened to Putin? But what is very clear to me is that the only way for Putin to even agree to this is that Trump most likely has already agreed to lift all sanctions overnight. And that's what it is. Okay. So this is the reason why Putin is willing to play ball, because I mean, the thought that sanctions will be all lifted and there will be U.S. money coming in to develop the whole basically rare earth. I mean, that's a very bullish story. I mean, Russia being re-invited back into the G8, like that's what it is. Okay. Now, from Ukrainian standpoint, I mean, let's put it this way. Zelensky knows very well. He's now playing hard to get. He doesn't want to give up the 10% of Donetsk. He wants to turn it into a neutral zone, whatever. It's going to be a tiny part anyway, whatever that means, free trade zone, whatever. The reality is this. If you don't give that up, if you don't make the exchange, you're going to lose it anyway. Because at the pace at which the Russians be moving, the Russians will basically take that 10% of Donetsk by late spring. I tell you that right now. Okay. So from that point of view, this is why this whole they haven't been resolved the territorial question is, to me, that is the dog and pony show. Because the truth is, Zelensky has every incentive to play hard to get for the consumption of his own people. I've always predicted that, one day Zelensky is going to be hung from the tallest tree by his own people in Kiev for having basically taken his country into this war. That there was no chance. On what? Just because Biden told you that he's going to have your back? As Kissinger famously said, being America's enemy is dangerous, but being America's friend is fatal. Okay? America has always only betrayed his so-called allies and again and again and again. And Zelensky was a fool to have basically trusted the Americans. And now half of Ukraine is completely destroyed. Okay? And the other half of Ukraine people have fled. Who's going to basically fix it? So once again, Ukraine shows the whole world that Americans cannot be trusted. Okay, in that respect. Nobody wants to be America's friends after this. So from that point of view, but Zelensky has only one way out. Either he's going to die, okay, or he's going to basically ultimately go into exile and live in his $30 million house in Miami, whatever it is. But the bottom line here is that I think now he's just trying to drag this out to look like that he got the best deal before he gives in. That's my view. So I think from that point of view, I think this thing is winding down. I mean, winding down, especially given that for Ukraine, a very important part of ending this, the only way Ukraine can sell this, Zelensky can sell this to his people, is to say, you know what, we didn't get into NATO, but we got an explicit security guarantee from the U.S. And Trump, to get his Nobel Prize, has basically agreed. Nobel Peace Prize, of course. Okay, so he's agreed a security guarantee. What this basically means is that the difference between a security guarantee versus NATO membership is in a NATO membership, if once Ukraine is inside NATO, which is what the Russians don't want, then NATO missile launchers could be deployed directly on Russia's border in Ukraine. A security guarantee is a very different thing. A security guarantee is going to say, well, if Ukraine were to come under attack, the U.S. would do A, B, and C in its defense, whatever it is. So it's a very different thing. The Russians can live with a security guarantee, but not a NATO membership. So that issue has also been settled. So I think all in all, what this basically means is that the way I see it is that in 2026, you have three countries that are currently subject, three major oil exporting countries that are subject to oil sanctions from the US. Russia, basically Iran, and Venezuela. I don't even need all three to be lifted. If two of the three gets lifted, oil price is going to go down to the low 50s and maybe in the 40s. And that's why I'm short the December 26 Brent contract. I'm also long the March contract simply because I think, in the short term, anything can happen. I mean, I'm not saying that these paths that I'm describing is going to be like a smooth straight line path, but that's why I'm short I'm long the March contract, which expires in 3 weeks, and I'm short the December contract. I think I'm optimistic that this is going to be a good trade. I made some money already. I mean, the last few weeks, especially yesterday, but we shall see.
Well, the other thing I wanted to follow up on was the question of China and Taiwan and how you see that situation playing out. We have seen some interesting developments. The Japanese prime minister making a comment that if China moved on Taiwan, that would threaten Japan's security and that they may have to get involved, caused a huge blowback from Beijing. We also saw recently China put sanctions on some U.S. defense firms. I want to read a quote here from Advanced Manufacturing. It said China has slapped sanctions on 20 U.S. defense companies and 10 of their executives in retaliation for $11 billion in pending U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. So the situation seems to be heating up here. Now, interestingly, where I live in Serbia, China's building a high-speed rail here, and the President Vucic, the president of Serbia, publicly came out and said, I want to say one very important thing as our Chinese friends work on this railroad. Taiwan is a part of China. That has always been the stance of Serbia. And so it's so interesting to see how this has become such a big issue over time. And obviously, the stated goal of China has been to reunify Taiwan by some means or another. Do you think that's something they're going to move forward with militarily at some point? Or is this a question of them playing the long game and trying to achieve that objective through diplomatic means? How do you see it all playing out?
Listen, so as I said, my parents are from China. I grew up in Taiwan. Okay, so I know both China and Taiwan very well. And, there's a reason why. I mean, the Taiwanese people are Chinese people, by the way. So it's not like, it's not like Serbs versus Croats. I mean, they speak the same language, the same religion, the whole entire thing the same. Now, what I can tell you is this. The reason why the Chinese people, we call ourselves the yellow people, is not because of skin color. It has to do with the fact that the Chinese people see themselves as the descendant of the yellow emperor. So why the yellow emperor? And why yellow again? Yellow is the color of the Yellow River, okay? And the sediment of the Yellow River basically provided this very nutritious, land, ground for the development of Chinese agriculture, 7,000 years ago. Okay. So from that point of view, there's no doubt that if there's one thing that the Chinese identify with, is land. And especially given the whole Confucian culture, of the last 3,000 years, 2,500 years, what this basically means is that, anybody who inherits land from his ancestors, if you were to sell that piece of land or get rid of it, whatever, he's seen as it's doing a very, very bad thing. You're committing a sin against basically your ancestors and everything else. It's a very basic and philosophical realm of how the Chinese think about themselves. And this is the reason why Xi Jinping cannot allow Taiwan to basically declare independence, because future historians will be very, very unkind to him if he allows that to happen. Now, however, what most people in the world apparently don't understand is that Taiwan, if you look at the Constitution of Taiwan, the Constitution of Taiwan basically says that we are part of China. Okay? Moreover, the Constitution basically says in Taiwan is that the current government of Taiwan, is the only legitimate government of all of China. Okay. So when we're talking about basically basically a one-state solution, that's what it means. I mean, right now, neither side, China obviously says Taiwan is part of China, and Taiwan Constitution says Taiwan is part of China. That the only debate is which is the legitimate government of China. Is Xi Jinping or the elected government, basically, of Taiwan? Now, what I'm saying to you, therefore, is from China's standpoint, Taiwan becomes an issue only if Taiwan were to decide to rewrite its constitution and declare independence. Okay. And what most gold buyers don't get, and again, there's so much misunderstanding. This is why gold is, to some extent, for idiots, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about stuff. In Taiwan, I conduct daily surveys in Taiwan. Among other things, I'm not going to go into. Many of my clients are intelligence agencies around the world, and that kind of thing. And I conduct surveys as part of my service to some of the biggest investors in the world. And these surveys are conducted in countries, in many countries where there are no even surveys. I conduct daily surveys in Iran, in Israel, in Russia, in Ukraine, also in China and Taiwan. And what I can tell you is the majority of Taiwanese don't want independence. The majority of Taiwanese people, they want either status quo or even unification with China, believe it or not. It's not like you would get that reading the New York Times. They don't want you to believe that in the New York Times. Okay. I'm telling you that's the case. Now, what you also need to understand is that following the election last year, the opposition party have now gained control of the legislative yuan. It's like the equivalent of U.S. Congress. The opposition parties are against independence, which means that the president of Taiwan, who's pro-independence, he can do anything. There's nothing he can do. He can't even call a referendum for independence. So what I'm saying to you is that right now, I can tell you something else, which is that the majority of people in Taiwan, they see what's going on in Ukraine. They said, we don't want to become the next Ukraine. We don't want the U.S. to use Taiwan as basically a battlefield to go weaken China. Because by now it's pretty obvious. You kind of have to be an idiot to not think that the U.S. was using Ukraine to basically weaken Russia. They have with no regards about the lives of the Ukrainian people. The Taiwanese don't want to be turned in. They don't want to be used by the Americans as basically let's put it this way: the Taiwanese don't want the Americans to fight to the last man in Taiwan with destroying country. This is why I'm saying to you, there is no rush for China to move against Taiwan. I'm just saying to you that I don't see a huge conflict erupting anytime soon. Okay. And push comes to shove, the U.S. won't allow it, at least not yet. Because right now, if China takes over Taiwan, then China takes over TSMC. And TSMC accounts for 95% of the production of the most high-end chips, which means NASDAQ will collapse overnight, basically. And that will be the end of the U.S. economy. So I'm just saying to you that it doesn't quite work that way. People tend to think, Trump goes after Venezuela. That means that, China's going to go after Taiwan. It is so far-fetched, it's almost ridiculous that people are even talking about it. You can only talk about it if you have absolutely no idea what's going on, actually. But of course, that's what's happening with gold. A lot of people who trade gold they don't understand how the world really works.
Yeah, some great insights there into what's going on the ground in Taiwan. So very much appreciate that. Now, another thread I'd like to pull on, you basically set up my whole interview with your answer to the first question. So that's great. But I'm wondering, the broad market, you said you don't have a lot of confidence in the trajectory of the broad market moving forward here in 2026. I've spoken to a lot of people on this show who believe it's grossly overvalued and due for a correction, potentially a crash and bear market. How do you see things playing out? Do you see it being in a bubble? And if so, could it be set to burst in 2026? And just your overall thoughts on the trajectory of the big indices.
Jesse, I think for me, if there's one thing I learned in 2025, and it's not I'm not saying it's a good thought or a bad thought. I'm a realist. I was born in the U.S. I grew up in Taiwan. I was educated for the most part in the U.S. and then lived in Europe most of my life, and now I live in Israel. So, I don't have any axe to grind from that point of view. Okay. Now, what I would say is this, okay, is that whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump, there's no denying that he got almost everything he wanted in 2025. Right? Think about this. Therefore, if there's one thing I've learned about investing in 2025, is don't fight against Trump. Okay, I've been trying to. I did spend quite a bit of the year trying to fight against Trump, and it definitely was pretty expensive. So from that point of view, this is very, very important. Don't fight against Trump. Now, so therefore, and because what for whatever reason, maybe he's lucky, maybe he's politically savvy, he's managed to get his way on most things. I mean, especially with respect to the market. So therefore, the first question we'll ask ourselves about 26 is, what does Trump want to do in 2026? And what matters to him? And what is going to be different about 26 versus 25 in terms of what Trump wants? Now, one thing is very clear to me is that even though Trump got exactly what he wanted from the market did his bidding in 2025. And yet his consumer confidence collapsed. And more importantly, his approval rating collapsed. So whatever Trump is going to do in 2026, I don't think it's going to be the same as in 2025. Okay. Now, you might say, well, but what is the objective in 2025? The objective in 2026, I'm sorry, Trump's objective in 2026 is very simple, is retaining the congressional majority of the Republican Party in the midterm election in November. It's very simple. I mean, let's put it this way. I think I've done this for a very long time. Over the last 30 years, I don't remember another president who would take it harder than Trump should his party lose the majority in Congress in the midterm. Because for Trump, that would mean that he goes from Trump the all-powerful to Trump the lame duck overnight. And the Democrats are not even going to waste any time trying to impeach him until the kingdom comes. So therefore, what I'm saying to you is that for me, Trump has to, everything Trump is going to do in 2026 is going to be about how to ensure his party retain control of U.S. Congress in the midterm. And to me, there are two things he's going to do. One, he has to win the affordability debate, the affordability argument. And the easiest way to win the affordability argument is by basically pushing oil prices lower. Trump understands oil better than anybody else. I mean, this guy really understands oil. And to me, a lower oil price is the easiest way. I mean, to basically to win the affordability debate, especially for the middle class, for the lower middle class. Oil, gasoline is a much bigger part of their budget, than anybody else. So from that point of view, for the high income household, so this is why I told you, I think ultimate 2026 trade, Trump trade, is you could argue gold was the 2025 Trump trade. Right? Because, global chaos. Well, at least on the newspaper, it feels like the world was chaotic, so everybody's basically went out to buy gold. I think actually 2026 is going to, the Trump trade of 2026 is to sell oil. Because that's what he needs. Okay. The other part of it is I think there's going to be, I don't want to go into this, but there's going to be another major fiscal stimulus coming on the way. I think Trump, I don't want to go into the specifics here, but let me just tell you this. My prediction is that there's at least a 65% chance, a 2/3 chance, that Trump is going to be able to push through his proposal for a 2,000 tariff rebate, but only for people making less than $75,000 a year. In other words, again, middle class and lower middle class. So my view is that this, of course, what happens. So I'm talking about lower oil price and basically more, stimulus for the middle class Americans. And this is obviously very bullish for, retailers that cater to sort of the middle class Americans and below. So I'm in that sector of the stock market is currently trading at a 5-year low. So I like it. Okay. So I think that's one part of the sector I actually like. But I do think that the cost of stimulus is going to be high rates. Because, there's no doubt, if you're going to go down this path, you're going to end up with high inflation and high rates. And that's probably going to be a problem for the interest rate sensitive stocks, especially AI stocks.
Well, given everything you've laid out today, talk to us a little bit more about which areas of the market you think present the greatest opportunity here. You mentioned the retailers that serve the middle class, and areas of the market you'd be avoiding would be oil, unless, of course, you're short selling it. Is there any other areas of the market that you're looking at that present an attractive value proposition at present, and any other areas aside from oil that you're bearish on?
Yeah, I generally, like it's actually pretty amazing. Last year, like I think, because I run a real portfolio. So because I have a retail business, but it's like 2% of my franchise. Like 90%, 95% of my business is servicing the largest macro investors in the world. Like the combined AUM, assets under management, of my clients is over $5 trillion. Okay, so I deal with some of the biggest. And then one of the things I do, because I believe in transparency and accountability. So I actually every piece of research I send out to my clients, I would actually implement the trade myself. And, in a $1 million portfolio sitting in an interactive broker account, $1 million is nothing, so they don't have to worry about me front running their trades. But at the same time, $1 million is enough money for me to build a transparent track record. Last year, I'm benchmarked to 3-month Treasury bills, like most hedge funds are. Last year, I finished up like 7%, which is about 300 basis points over 3-month Treasury bills, which was not great. Okay, however, what's interesting is that the correlation of my returns with S&P 500 was minus 75%. Okay, so I generally trade with a defensive streak. But the fact that the stock market did very well, I still managed to beat the benchmark last year. I guess it gave me some consolation that it was not a terrible year. But the point here is that I think these days retail investors are just as active in shorting things as they are in long things. I mean, there are so many inverse ETF, that kind of thing. I don't think so I don't think about the world in terms of only long, and then I think about what I want to avoid. I think about everything as the same. There are a lot of things I like. I mean, I like I like India. Okay, so I think Nifty 50, which was the worst performing stock market last year, despite the fact India was the fastest growing economy in the world. That makes no sense to me. Okay, and I think we are getting closer to a deal between India and the U.S. over the tariff. And I think low oil price, given India is a major oil importer, it's going to be bullish for India. So I think from that point of view, I'm long the Nifty 50. Against a short Nasdaq position. So I can't stand the air bubble. I think in the currency world, I think the RMB is going to be. I think the RMB is going to have a good year this year. Not for anything else, but because I think the trade tension between China and Europe is starting to heat up. I mean, China was able to grow last year 5%, despite the U.S. tariff, only by increasing exports to Europe. Now China runs $1 trillion trade surplus, and then and the protectionist rhetoric is heating up in Europe. I think China is going to try to get ahead of that by maybe appreciating its currency a bit more quickly. And again, this is not about a 10%, 20%, 30%. I'm just saying that at least in the first half of this year, I could see a faster appreciation of the currency, maybe 5%, 6%, whatever it is, depending obviously on a lot of other things. But I think against the euro especially. Okay. I also like the Mexican story. I actually think that in the end, this Venezuela thing, it's actually quite bullish for Mexico medium term, because President Claudia Sheinbaum, she hates the drug cartel. Okay. And it's not like AMLO, her predecessor, who was willing to coexist with the cartel. She really hates the cartel. Now, just think about this. Now she's going to be able to turn around and say, if we don't take care of the cartel, we have to worry about Trump getting directly involved in Mexico, which would be much worse. So I think from that point of view, ironically, what Trump just did in Venezuela is going to strengthen the hand of Claudia Sheinbaum, who I think is a very good president. Okay. And then actually might push Mexico closer to the U.S. So I think from that point of view, I think Mexico Mexico did well last year. I think it's still a good story.
Well, David, this has been a fantastic conversation. So many great insights shared. Tell us about David Wu Unbound, your YouTube channel. And you mentioned you do serve the retail market as well when it comes to managing funds and investing. So talk to us about how people can reach out to you for that as well.
Yeah. So I put out one video a week on my YouTube channel, David Wu Unbound. So that's free. I mean, whatever, and but if you're interested in my investment strategy, which is more high frequency, you can check me out at davidwuunbound.com. So we offer a whole bunch of things that people might find interesting. But obviously, we have a sort of a macro focus. But what we do for retail investors is that we translate the macro focus and predictions into stock selections.
Great. Well, I'll put links to the YouTube channel as well as davidwuunbound.com in the description below. Thank you so much, David, for coming on. It's been a blast.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jesse. Okay. Take care. Happy New Year.
Thank you for joining us today. Our sponsor, ARC Silver Gold Osmium, has some great prices on silver bullion products. They are on your screen right now. These are while supplies last and subject to change. So reach out to owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you, and pick up your Commodity Culture merch, the Stack Silver, Not Fiat t-shirt. Use the link in the description below, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.